today. So we're going to move now into our final speaker of the day. It's Dr. Adam Brown, who's Head of Research at Substance, because I think Martin touched upon this, and John, you did as well, this whole notion that there's so many ideas about how we can engage people and have a really good impact. But often as a sector, we've really been kind of slated in terms of being able to demonstrate that impact. So I think Adam is going to talk to us really about demonstrating the impact of these kinds of places and how you can do that regardless of the size of your organisation or the scale of your organisation. Some fundamental principles that if we all kind of take them on board, it helps us to make the case more locally, but it also helps when you're having those very senior level conversations right across the city region. I think, Martin, what you said, you know, in Greater Manchester, life expectancy difference is 12 years. It's just not right. Should be for everybody. We should all have a good quality of life. So if we can create a better case, if we can create more investment therefore from different departments, I think that's only going to benefit everybody, but more importantly the communities that we serve. So Adam, over to you.
Thank you very much. The last session of the day to talk about the importance of valuation. I think you better lock the doors to make sure everyone stays in. I think it is just picking up on that. It's in both those presentations, what come through is the ambition of events and of facilities, and that's been a theme all the way through today. What I wanted to focus on really here is that all of that ambition is fine. A lot of the work that's going on is very, very good. But unless we're able to demonstrate that, then there's a big hole in the equation, really. And this, I'm going to talk a little bit about community sports businesses and facilities, because that's a very strong emerging theme within community sport at the moment, and it's an area that we've worked on with Substance, both in terms of the software that we produce to help evaluation, but also the research projects that we've done for Sport England and others. But it does really apply across the board, whether you're talking about a mega event or you're talking about a library that's been taken over by a local community group. Setting a bit of context for this, I think there's been a change over the last few years in terms of a stress on the need for difference and different ways of doing things. It's come through in terms of the government strategy, Sporting Futures, talking about co-locating facilities with other services and doing things differently in that kind of way. In Sport England's strategy, very much a stress on helping communities to take ownership of facilities and help run them, whether that's actual ownership through community asset transfers, forming community interest companies and the like, or whether just being involved in the running of facilities more. And the Community Assets Fund, which I think Charles touched on this morning, has very much stressed the importance of working in new and different ways. So it could be a village hall that's the focus for sports investment rather than traditional sports venue. And they're looking for new ideas, they're looking for less grant dependency, and they're looking for more resilient organisations. So there's a wider context here in which this sits, which is that there's a desire for things to be done differently. And if there's that desire, then there's a need to be able to demonstrate whether that difference works or not. The second context is a broader kind of business context, really, in terms of the move towards cooperativism, the development of co-ops and the growth of co-ops and community interest companies and the like, which really, since the financial crash, have been seen as a bit more of a sustainable way of running organisations, whether that's your local pub, your local library, or your local sports club. And that broader kind of context has very much come through under the Localism Act and the localism legislation, which has sought to empower communities to take control of their local assets. And I think that has a very particular relevance for sport, where you've got local authorities seeking to disinvest, seeking to find other ways of running, whether it's a park or a sports hall or a swimming pool. There's a need for communities to get more involved. And the Localism Act's been important in shaping that. There are big problems how that legislation's being drafted, but it has created an atmosphere in which community organisations now feel more able to take control of their facilities. And there's been a big rise in community asset transfers. It's probably the biggest growth area in community asset transfers across the sector. And so you've got all these a range of agencies now seeking to develop this sector, from power to change to social investment business, big society capital. Sporting capital is a very specific sport-related investment vehicle for community sports facilities and organisations. And so there's this broader kind of groundswell both of funding for these kind of ventures, but also wider legislative support for them. And the results are starting to emerge. So the community sports business market, so this is sports businesses, clubs, swimming pools, leisure centres, multi-facility centres, are growing probably faster than any other sector. And this is Power to Change's research that's suggested they're growing. The sports sector is growing faster than any other sector in relation to community sport. And I don't know if you can see, but sport and leisure in terms of income is up there over between 400 and 500 million, and in terms of asset value is second highest next to community hubs at 400 million. And that's been underpinned partly by new kinds of investment into sports facilities like community shares, crowdfunding sources and things like that that have really started to emerge as a significant investment into the delivery of community sport. And all of this is underpinned by there are some fairly big claims made about what this will deliver, right from increasing facility use, so that community ownership of sports facilities can increase the use and local participation, income generation, a more enterprising kind of approach to how clubs operate and sports organisations operate, putting residents and local residents firmly in control in terms of running and leading organisations, big increases in volunteering around those businesses that are community owned. We did a piece of work for Supports Direct a number of years ago looking at the value of volunteering in those sports clubs in rugby league and football, which were fan owned, and it was really significant in terms of the level of investment, right through to providing employment for local people. And again, Power to Change's research around some of this has suggested that sports and leisure businesses are more adept at diversifying their income, having strong financial and operational bases, and stronger partnerships than perhaps traditional sports organisations have been. So that's the kind of claims that are made around this. And there's a number of really good examples, and I'll whiz through these. All of these are from work we did for Sport England, and so they're all available on Sport England's website. But Manvers Lake is an old mining site in Nottingham, which was derelict from the late 1980s onwards. They filled it in, they made a lake, and over the 25 years it developed a really inspirational sports club. And the start of it was really a feeling they wanted to develop a canoeing club that was different to all the other canoeing clubs. And they saw it as a vehicle, as a site in which they could demonstrate how things can be done differently. And I think one of the key differences in how they approached it was they developed it as a genuine multi-sport site, but they had a one club philosophy around it. So you join the club, and that means you can take part in canoeing, sailboarding, fishing, swimming, triathlon, whatever it is. There's about 10 or 11 different sports that operate all around this one lake. And that philosophy has underpinned everything they do. It's hugely accessible. It's attracting audiences from the target groups for Sport England's strategy in terms of the high A&D areas. It's delivering on well-being by providing really attractive blue-green space in what was a former industrial site. Another example is Furness Vale in the Peak District, where it's taken them 10 or 11 years to develop a football pitch that was really badly drained. It was a bit of a joke amongst local football leagues about how bad this pitch was. But they formed a community company, and they realised that it had to be bigger than just about providing a pitch. So they've got pathways for walking, they've got equipment, gym equipment in the outdoors, they've got links with volunteer groups, and last year they were awarded the most improved site by Fields in Trust. Another example, Football Development Association, where they developed 9 new pitches involving more than 400 clubs, and they formed a new company that brought together football leagues to combine together to run it. Significant funding from Power to Change and Sport England, and have generated huge levels of participation, very high involvement of BME communities who were previously excluded or a bit marginal to football development, and coaching and volunteering programs to upskill the people who get involved. So there's just, there's plenty of examples out there about things being done well. But across the board, if you look across the board, and even in some of those cases, the evaluation is partial. It's not very comprehensive. Much of it is anecdotal and not perhaps as robust as you'd want. There's a lack of consistent data across the sector. So if you look across all those different funding streams, there isn't a consistent way in which they're being assessed. And that means that you can't compare, you can't learn, and you can't really demonstrate the impact of it across the board. And that lack of robust data and evaluation has meant that there's a lack of a convincing case, we believe, for the community sports business facilities. There's lots of evidence there, but it isn't being brought together in a way that amounts to a convincing case. And part of the reason for that is perfectly understandable. Funders want to get the money out the door. They want programs to be seen as successful, and there is perhaps at times not wanting to report on failure, but wanting to report on success. And there's a tendency not to make very stringent demands on the businesses they invest in, the facilities they invest in, to demonstrate the impact that investment has made. And I think if you talk to any of the agencies around this, they'd probably accept that as fair. From the community business side, there are also tensions within that. Businesses want to get on with running the business, and they don't want to get on with providing evaluation data to funders to demonstrate what they know in their heart is right, which is what they're doing is good. So there's a tension there at both the provider end of the funding towards this as well as the supplier end. And that really combines to a pretty low bar that's being set at times about how this kind of sector and these kind of facilities. And I'd argue as well that probably applies to mega events as much as it does to community sports businesses. We did evaluation years way back in a previous life of the Manchester Commonwealth Games for UK Sport. This is when I was at Manchester Met. And it was the case then that there wasn't enough evaluation of what impact this major event had on sports participation. So I think the message is really across the board that there's been really inspiring stories today about how facilities can help engage communities. But unless we get better at demonstrating what that actually delivers on well-being, on health, on employment, and all those, and education, all those social impacts that you've all said are so important, then really the case isn't being made well enough. But what can be done? Well, we do work which would be, and plenty of others do as well. We would do what gets termed theory of change exercises with organisations. That's basically saying, what is it that you want to achieve and how are you going to achieve that? So that you know from the outset that it isn't just a sense that sport is good and the facility is going to be good, but it's how what you do and the activities you do is going to deliver that aim. We develop impact frameworks with organisations to help them put measures in place and think about how they're going to evidence against those measures so that they can report it. And we help organisations put systems in place to do that. And that can involve people, it can involve software, it can involve questionnaires, and it can involve data collection. And there is help out there. We work with a programme called Inspire and Impact, and there's an impact hub on the Inspire and Impact website, which brings together all the tools out there. So I'm not making a particular pitch that Substance are the only people doing this. There's plenty of tools out there that you can access. And Inspire and Impact is a project which has sought to make those available to people. There's help on Sport England, on the Club Matters community rights guidance toolkit. There's guidance there about how you can undertake it. And yes, we do have our own software as well, Views, to help organisations do this. And this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. It isn't rocket science. I don't know if you can see that yellow too well there. But if you're claiming that your facility is going to involve local people more, then start to map your membership. Is it open and representative? Do they participate in governance? Have you got membership data that you can compare to the local population data? It's pretty easy to do. It's pretty low cost to do. There's some really easy measures which you can put in place. And you say you're there to benefit local people. Well, are you doing that? Simple, high-level satisfaction surveys with local residents, local businesses, local community organisations to get that kind of feedback. All of this is pretty low level and cheap to do, but it isn't being put in place across the board. So the challenge then is that if funders and those receiving funding do not improve the impact and valuation of community sports businesses, then some of the claims that are being made really maybe seem to be quite hollow. And there is a need for us to improve this. And I think that is at two levels, really. At a macro level, we need to have agreement across the board about some simple measures and metrics that will demonstrate the value of community sports facilities that can be agreed and measured across the board. And at the grassroots level, at the delivery level, there needs to be a greater commitment that those organisations need to report against it. And part of that comes from funding, part of it comes from a culture change amongst those organisations, and part of it comes from the support that's given to those. One of the interesting factors I think about the Community Assets Fund that's been launched by Sport England is it's providing some revenue and skills support alongside capital grant support to actually build things. And if it sounds like it's easy to be saying this from the outside, I have practical experience of doing this in a community sports club and building a facility as well with FC United. So I know how difficult it is, particularly in organisations that are largely volunteer-led. But unless we meet that challenge, there's a real danger that there'll be a load of people saying community sports businesses work, and a load of other people saying, well, where's the proof? So thank you very much for your attention.